On the evening of July 4th, 1942, three terse radio signals shattered the fate of 35 merchant ships bound for Soviet Russia. Convoy is to scatter. Those four words, issued by Britain's highest naval authority, triggered the worst Allied convoy disaster of World War II. Within days, 24 ships lay on the Barents Sea floor, taking with them 430 tanks, 210 aircraft, and the lives of 153 merchant seamen. The cruel irony: the German battleship Tirpitz, whose feared approach prompted the scatter order, never fired a single shot at the convoy. She hadn't even left port when Admiral Dudley Pound ordered the convoy to disperse. The Arctic convoy route to Murmansk and Archangel emerged from desperate necessity. After Hitler's invasion of the Soviet Union on June 22, 1941, keeping Stalin's forces in the fight became an Allied imperative. Over 80% of all World War II combat occurred on the Eastern Front. The Lend-Lease Act, signed in March 1941, eventually delivered $11.3 billion worth of American materiel to the Soviets, including 400,000 trucks, 14,000 aircraft, and 13,000 tanks. Three routes could deliver these supplies. The Pacific route through Vladivostok handled 50% of aid but was restricted to non-military cargo due to Soviet-Japanese neutrality. The Persian corridor through Iran eventually carried 27%, but wasn't fully operational until mid-1942. That left the Arctic, the shortest route at roughly 10 days transit, the only one capable of delivering tanks and aircraft immediately, and by far the deadliest. Churchill called it the worst journey in the world. Temperatures plummeted to -40 degrees. Waves reached 80 feet. Sea spray froze instantly on ship surfaces, creating ice buildup that could capsize a vessel within hours. HMS Sulla from Convoy PQ-9 capsized exactly this way. Crews worked constantly with axes and steam hoses, chipping ice from guns, decks, and superstructures in one of the war's most dangerous routine duties. A man overboard had perhaps 5 minutes before the cold killed him. When the destroyer HMS Matabele was torpedoed in January 1942, rescue ships arrived within minutes, yet found only 2 survivors from a crew of 200. The route's most insidious danger was light itself. PQ-17 sailed in late June, under the midnight sun. Continuous daylight meant German reconnaissance aircraft could shadow the convoy around the clock, reporting positions to Luftwaffe bombers and waiting U-boat wolf packs. Convoy PQ-17 departed Hvalfjord, Iceland at 4 p.m. on June 27, 1942. Its 35 merchant ships, 22 American, 8 British, 2 Soviet, 2 Panamanian, and 1 Dutch, carried what one officer called enough to equip an army of 50,000 men. The cargo manifest read like an arsenal: 297 aircraft, 594 tanks, 4,246 vehicles, and 156,000 tons of general supplies, including ammunition, radar sets, and food. Total value, approximately $700 million in 1942 dollars. The Royal Navy assembled formidable protection. Commander Jack Broom led the close escort from HMS Keppel with 6 destroyers, 4 corvettes, 3 minesweepers, 2 anti-aircraft cruisers, and 4 armed trawlers. Rear Admiral Lewis Hamilton commanded a cruiser covering force built around HMS London, HMS Norfolk, USS Wichita, and USS Tuscaloosa. Further west lurked the distant heavy covering force, the battleships HMS Duke of York and USS Washington, the aircraft carrier HMS Victorious, and 9 destroyers under Admiral Sir John Tovey. Yet critical restrictions hobbled this impressive fleet. The cruiser force was forbidden to venture east of Bear Island or beyond 25 degrees east longitude. The battleships couldn't risk operating within range of Norwegian-based German aircraft. These orders reflected the Admiralty's paramount concern: preserving capital ships to counter the threat of Tirpitz should she sortie. The result was a paradox. The convoy's ultimate protectors couldn't actually protect it where protection mattered most. By the summer of 1942, the Germans had transformed occupied Norway into an Arctic fortress. Tirpitz, sister ship of the battleship that sank HMS Hood, arrived at Trondheim in January, joining the heavy cruisers Admiral Hipper, Admiral Scheer, and Lutzow. Luftflotte. 5 assembled 264 aircraft, including 103 Ju-88 bombers, 42 He-111 torpedo bombers, and 30 Ju-87 Stukas. The U-boat force grew from 3 submarines to over 20. Operation Russellsprung, Knight's Move, called for these forces to converge on PQ-17. 2 battle groups would attack from Trondheim and Narvik, while U-boat Wolfpack Eisteufel, Ice Devil, and Luftwaffe squadrons harried the convoy from the moment of detection. German reconnaissance found the convoy on July 1st. For 3 days, BV-138 flying boats shadowed at the edge of visibility, transmitting positions. Air attacks began on July 2nd, intensifying through July 4th. Yet the concentrated convoy beat them off magnificently. Commander Broom's diary entry on the morning of July 4th captured the mood. My impression was that providing the ammunition lasted, PQ-17 could get anywhere. By evening, that assessment would become a bitter epitaph. Only 3 ships had been lost since leaving Iceland. At the Admiralty's Operational Intelligence Center in London, Lieutenant Commander Norman Denning monitored German naval communications through ultra-intercepts. By late July 3rd, he knew Tirpitz and Hipper had left Trondheim and were moving toward Altenfjord, but this was repositioning, not attack deployment. When First Sea Lord Admiral Dudley Pound summoned Denning and demanded certainty, the intelligence officer offered his professional judgment. If Tirpitz intended to sail against the convoy, the Germans would have warned their own submarines and aircraft to avoid friendly fire. No such warnings had been intercepted. My sources would have confirmed if the ship had or was about to put to sea, Denning assured him. Pound overruled his own intelligence staff. The 65-year-old admiral, suffering from chronic insomnia caused by hip degeneration and harboring an undiagnosed brain tumor, fixated on the worst-case scenario. If Tirpitz caught the convoy concentrated, destruction would be absolute. At 9:11 p.m. on July 4th, 1942, he issued the first signal. Cruiser force withdraw to westward at high speed. 12 minutes later, owing to threat from surface ships, convoy is to disperse. At 9:36 p.m., the fatal correction, convoy is to scatter. The technical distinction between disperse and scatter carried devastating implications. In Royal Navy signal books, the scatter was reserved for situations where enemy warships were visible on the horizon, imminent annihilation. Captains receiving the signal expected to see Tirpitz's mass at any moment. Commander Broom's reaction captured the tragedy. I was angry at having to break up, disintegrate such a formation, and to tear up the protective fence we had wrapped around it. He signaled Commodore Dowding aboard the freighter River Afton. Sorry to leave you like this. Goodbye and good luck. It looks like a bloody business. The merchant ship's flag responses told the story, all hoisted signal flags at the dip, indicating, I do not understand. They understood all too well. What followed haunted the naval officers for the rest of their lives. Believing they were racing to intercept Tirpitz, Broom's destroyers tore away westward at full speed, bringing up armor-piercing ammunition for the expected surface battle. Lieutenant Roger Hill on HMS Ledbury later revealed his private resolution. If they found Tirpitz, he would try to ram her. No battle came. The destroyers joined Hamilton's cruisers and continued withdrawing. Future Vice Admiral W.D. O'Brien later wrote, I have never been able to rejoice with my American friends on Independence Day because July 4th is to me a day to hang my head in grief, when the warships deserted the merchant ships and left them to their fate. Behind them, 35 merchant ships scattered across the Barents Sea, alone, unprotected, hunted. Douglas Fairbanks, Jr., serving as a naval liaison officer on USS Wichita, recorded his fury. What kind of high command have we that with such great force in operation we cannot fight it out? The Germans could scarcely believe their luck. July 5th became the convoy's bloodiest day, 12 ships sunk in 24 hours. Ju-88s from KG-30 caught merchantmen spread across hundreds of square miles of ocean, attacking without interference. U-boats surfaced to torpedo crippled stragglers. The Reich's propaganda ministry celebrated as distress calls flooded the airwaves, and being bombed by large number of planes, on fire in the ice, 6 U-boats approaching on the surface, abandoning ship. The cruel irony remained hidden for hours. Tirpitz hadn't sailed when Pound issued his order. She didn't leave Altenfjord until 3 p.m. on July 5th, 18 hours after the convoy scattered. 6 hours later, Admiral Raeder recalled her, fearing a British trap. Germany's dreaded battleship achieved the destruction of an entire convoy without firing a shot. The scattered merchant ships faced annihilation with only their own resources. Some found salvation in ingenuity and desperate courage. Lieutenant Leo Gradwell commanded the armed trawler HMS Ayrshire with a crew of peacetime fishermen. A barrister in civilian life, Gradwell had no charts for the Arctic, only a sextant and the Times World Geographic pocketbook. When the scatter order came, he gathered 3 American merchant ships, Troubadour, Ironclad, and Silver Sword, and led them north into the polar ice pack. The tiny convoy pushed deep into the floes, stopped engines, and banked fires. Then Gradwell discovered Troubadour carried drums of white paint in her cargo. Over the next hours, crews painted all 4 vessels white and covered decks with white linen. Sailors positioned Sherman tanks from the merchant ship's cargo on deck, loading their main guns and training them skyward as improvised anti-aircraft batteries. For 2 days, the white ship sat silent among the ice, listening to distress calls from dying vessels. Luftwaffe reconnaissance flew overhead without spotting them. All 4 ships eventually reached Archangel. Gradwell received the Distinguished Service Cross. SS Washington carried 600 tons of high explosives when Ju-88s hit her on July 5th, setting her deck cargo ablaze. Her crew abandoned ship into 2 lifeboats. When another merchantman approached to rescue them, the survivors repeatedly waved her off. We would simply be leaving one target for another. They voted to stay adrift, hoping the Germans would ignore lifeboats. Within hours, they watched their would-be rescuers sink, hit by 3 torpedoes. Rigging sails and rowing in shifts, the Washington survivors reached Soviet territory after 10 freezing days. Seaman Donald Ross Naggetts was manning a machine gun on SS Pan Atlantic when 2 bombs detonated her cordite cargo on July 6th. The ship sank in 3 minutes, too fast to transmit a distress signal. Naggetts found himself in the frigid sea, clinging to floating ice until he reached a raft with a dead body on it. He had to push the corpse into the water to save himself. After a day alone, he was picked up by fellow survivors in a lifeboat. 4 more days passed before rescue. When Naggetts reached the Soviet Union, his shoes and socks had to be cut off. His hands and feet were so swollen they couldn't be removed any other way. When U-703 sank SS Empire Byron with 5 torpedoes on the morning of July 5th, the submarine surfaced near the survivors' lifeboats. The German captain took 1 British officer prisoner for interrogation, then did something unexpected. He provided the remaining survivors with tins of biscuits, sausage, and apple juice before diving. HMS Dianella later rescued 61 crewmen. The final accounting devastated the Allies. Of 35 merchant ships that departed Iceland, 24 were lost. Only 11 reached Soviet ports. The Barents Sea swallowed 430 tanks, 210 aircraft, 3,350 vehicles, and nearly 100,000 tons of general cargo. 153 merchant seamen died, 107 of them American. Remarkably, only 7 had perished before the scatter order. German losses were negligible, 5 aircraft from over 200 sorties. Not a single U-boat was sunk. Churchill called PQ-17 one of the most melancholy naval episodes in the whole of the war. The rescue ship Zamalek embodied both the horror and heroism of those days. She picked up 216 survivors from 7 sunken ships, bombs falling around her so close that one stick actually took the Zamalek right out of the water so that you could see daylight between the keel and the water. Engineers rescued from various wrecks helped repair her damaged engines. She would finish the war having saved 665 men from 68 convoys, more than any other rescue ship. Stalin was apoplectic. He questioned whether the British Navy had lost all sense of glory and accused the Western Allies of being fair-weather friends. When Soviet Admiral Kharlamov met Admiral Pound to ask when the next convoy would sail, the encounter turned bitter. Ambassador Ivan Maysky delivered a cutting rebuke. Even British admirals make mistakes. Arctic convoys were immediately suspended. The Germans gloated. Admiral Raeder told Hitler that our submarines and aircraft, which totally destroyed the last convoy, have forced the enemy to give up this route temporarily. Churchill flew to Moscow in August 1942 for his first face-to-face meeting with Stalin, partly to address the convoy crisis and the postponement of the Second Front. The official inquiry into PQ-17 assigned no blame to anyone. The reason was political. Admiral Pound had issued the orders, and publicly condemning the First Sea Lord was deemed unacceptable. Pound's health continued deteriorating, his brain tumor remained undiagnosed, and he suffered a stroke during the Quebec Conference in August 1943. He resigned in September and died on October 21, 1943, Trafalgar Day. When Convoy PQ-18 sailed in September 1942, hard lessons had been learned. The escort included HMS Avenger, the first escort carrier to accompany an Arctic convoy carrying Hurricane fighters and Swordfish anti-submarine aircraft. 16 destroyers, nearly 3 times PQ-17's escort, formed a fighting destroyer escort with orders to stay with the merchantmen. Despite losing 13 ships, PQ-18 proved the route could be held. The Germans lost over 40 aircraft and 3 U-boats. The Arctic convoys continued until May 1945. 78 convoys delivered over 4 million tons of supplies through 1,400 merchant ship voyages, including 12,206 aircraft, 12,755 tanks, and millions of tons of ammunition, fuel, and food. Approximately 100 merchant vessels were lost along with 16 Royal Navy warships. Over 3,000 Allied servicemen died on the Arctic run. For decades, survivors received only the Atlantic Star, the same medal given to sailors on Atlantic convoys. Veterans argued their service was entirely different, marked by unique and extraordinary dangers. After a 16-year campaign led by Royal Navy veteran commander Eddie Grenfell, Prime Minister David Cameron announced the Arctic Star in December 2012. By 2020, fewer than 550 UK-based Arctic convoy veterans remained alive to receive it. The wrecks of PQ-17's 23 merchant ships still rest on the Barents seabed. In 2020, a joint UK-Russian expedition surveyed the graves using sonar mapping. The ships lie as monuments to the 153 men who died in July 1942 and to a decision that remains debated by naval historians 8 decades later. Commander Jack Broom, who led PQ-17's escort and spent the rest of his life defending his actions, captured the convoy's meaning in a single haunting line. "I can never forget how they cheered us as we moved out at full speed to the attack, and it has haunted me ever since that we left them to be destroyed."